Marcus had money long before love ever learned his name. Wealth clung to him the way confidence clings to a man who has never known hunger. His mansion did not scream excess, it whispered power. Every corridor knew his footsteps. Every worker knew his temper, which was calm but commanding. Marcus was the kind of man people pointed at and said, "That one has arrived." He had businesses that ran smoothly without his presence, and accounts that grew even when he slept. Women noticed him, men respected him, and elders praised his discipline. For a man with so much access, Marcus was surprisingly restrained. He dressed simply, spoke carefully, and avoided scandal. He liked order. He liked control. And most of all, he liked being admired for doing things the right way. Then he met Rita. She did not chase him. That alone confused him. Rita was gentle but not weak, soft-spoken but observant. She listened more than she talked, laughed quietly, and asked questions that made Marcus pause before answering. She wasn't impressed by his cars or the size of his mansion. When he showed her his wealth, she nodded politely and asked about his values instead. Marcus found that strangely attractive. For the first time, he wanted to impress a woman without money. He proposed carefully, thoughtfully, certain of his choice. When they married, people said Rita was lucky. Few noticed that Marcus was luckier. Marriage did not reduce Marcus's wealth, it refined him. Rita brought warmth into a house that had only known structure. She rearranged nothing, but changed everything. The mansion felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Marcus began to rush back after work, eager for her quiet conversations and gentle humor. He was faithful not because he had to be, but because he wanted to be. He liked being a husband who could say no. At gatherings, when men joked about women on the side, Marcus smiled politely and declined the joke. "My wife is enough," he would say, half proud, half amused. At the time, he meant it completely. The early years of Marcus and Rita's marriage unfolded like a well-written song, steady, meaningful, and unforced. Rita learned the rhythms of Marcus's world while never losing herself in it. She didn't compete with his wealth. She complemented his discipline. Mornings were calm. Evenings were predictable in the best way. Marcus admired how Rita never demanded luxury, yet treated everything with care. She spoke to staff with respect, corrected mistakes gently, and never used her position as a wife to intimidate anyone. Marcus noticed. He liked how she handled power without abusing it. Their marriage wasn't loud, but it was admired. Marcus, in those days, was proud of his loyalty. He enjoyed telling people how marriage had settled him. He loved saying it out loud, as though repeating it made it stronger. Rita believed him. She had no reason not to. He came home on time. His phone stayed face up. His laughter belonged to the house. Sometimes they would sit in silence, and Marcus would think, "This is peace." Rita felt safe enough to dream. She imagined growing old with this man, not because he was rich, but because he was consistent. Love, to her, was reliability dressed in kindness. There were small jokes, harmless ones. Rita teased Marcus about how serious he was. Marcus joked that Rita was too forgiving for her own good. They laughed easily. When friends visited, they saw partnership, not performance. What neither of them noticed was how closely people watched Marcus. Admiration has teeth. Envy listens quietly. Some acquaintances smiled at Rita, but measured Marcus instead. They admired his wealth, but questioned his restraint. "A man like that," they whispered, "living like a monk?" Marcus laughed it off then. He had no idea those whispers were waiting patiently for the right moment to grow louder. The advice did not arrive rudely. It arrived wearing laughter, drinks, and familiar faces. At private gatherings, Marcus's acquaintances spoke casually about indulgence, as though it were wisdom. They praised his wealth and joked about how wasted it was on discipline. "Enjoy yourself," they said. "You've earned it." At first, Marcus rejected them without effort. He laughed and defended Rita, calling her his piece. The men laughed back, but their eyes held something else, challenge. They didn't argue. They planted ideas. Over time, repetition softened resistance. Marcus began hearing the same message from different mouths. They praised his status, questioned his restraint, and framed temptation as entitlement. Faithfulness is good, they said, but excess is a reward. Marcus still didn't cheat, but he started listening. He began staying out later, not because he wanted another woman, but because he enjoyed being admired. Rita noticed the change, but said nothing. She trusted the foundation they had built. She believed loyalty, once chosen, did not need daily guarding. Humor crept in too. Marcus joked about being old-fashioned. His friends laughed and called him disciplined to a fault. Somewhere between laughter and ego, a crack formed. Marcus began to wonder, not if he should cheat, but why he shouldn't. That question alone was dangerous. Rita, unaware of these conversations, continued being herself, kind, patient, trusting. She did not know that trust, when unguarded, can sometimes become invisible to the one receiving it. Marcus's first mistake wasn't betrayal, it was silence. He stopped sharing his thoughts with Rita. He stopped defending the marriage in rooms she wasn't present in. He let jokes slide. Let comments pass. Let admiration linger too long. His ego began to stretch its legs. He enjoyed being seen as desirable outside his home. When a woman laughed too loudly at his jokes, he didn't stop her. When compliments lingered, he absorbed them. He still came home, but later. Still faithful, but distracted. Rita sensed something shift. Not betrayal, just distance. She asked gentle questions. Marcus answered vaguely. He said work was stressful. She believed him. She adjusted. She always adjusted. That was Rita's quiet flaw. Her patience was endless. Marcus interpreted it as acceptance. He began feeling powerful. Untouchable. The night of the first betrayal was unplanned and perfectly justified, at least in Marcus's mind. It happened after laughter, drinks, and encouragement. He told himself it was harmless. One mistake. No emotions. He promised himself it would never repeat. Guilt followed briefly, like a shadow at sunrise, short-lived. His friends dismissed it easily. You're still a good husband, they said. One slip doesn't change that. Marcus believed them. He didn't know that betrayal rarely arrives alone. It returns with confidence. What began as guilt slowly became routine. Marcus cheated again, then again. Each time, the weight felt lighter. The lies came easier. He compartmentalized his life with impressive precision. Rita remained in the wife box, respected, stable, ignored. The other women existed in a separate world, where consequences felt imaginary. Marcus began to enjoy the thrill. Power tasted sweeter when shared secretly. He felt admired again. Young, desired, important. Eventually, secrecy bored him. Marcus grew bold. He started bringing mistresses into the second rooms of the mansion, places he convinced himself were separate enough to be harmless. Rita heard laughter through walls that once echoed peace. She confronted him, softly at first. She pleaded. She reminded him of who he used to be. Marcus refused. He dismissed her pain. He called her emotional. He told her to adapt. Love, he said, should be flexible. Rita begged again. She advised. She cried. Marcus refused. He had changed, and change, once comfortable, rarely reverses easily. The man who once rushed home now flaunted disrespect under the same roof. Rita did not scream. She endured. She watched. And somewhere deep inside her, something began to shift quietly, preparing for a future Marcus could not yet imagine. Marcus did not wake up one morning and decide to become cruel. Cruelty is usually just selfishness that has lost its manners. After the first betrayal, he tried to return to normal like a man wiping soup from his shirt and pretending a stain is just water. For a few days, he overcompensated, bought Rita small gifts, asked about her day, even sat with her longer at dinner. Yet his eyes kept drifting to his phone as though it contained oxygen. The guilt in him was real, but it was weak, and weak guilt is a dangerous thing because it makes a person feel forgiven before they've even apologized. He started telling himself stories, that all wealthy men do it, that he was still a provider, that Rita would be fine because she had a soft heart and soft hearts don't break loudly. The problem was, the more he repeated these stories, the more they began to sound like truth. And once a lie becomes comfortable, it starts asking for furniture. Then temptation began to visit him like an old neighbor who just wants to greet you, only to end up staying for dinner. Marcus's acquaintances became bolder, cheering him on with casual wickedness. They joked about how guilty men are the easiest to manipulate. Buy her a handbag, she'll smile. By your freedom, you'll breathe, they said, laughing like laughter can erase consequences. Marcus began to move differently. Slightly lighter steps, slightly louder confidence, slightly more impatience when Rita asked questions he didn't want to answer. He stopped being afraid of small risks. He started flirting openly in places he used to be careful. And when he cheated again, the guilt returned, but weaker, like a candle in the wind. He told himself, I'm still coming home. I'm still her husband. I'm still Marcus. It's funny how a man can keep his title while losing the meaning. By the end of that season, the betrayal had become less of a mistake and more of a hobby he defended. Marcus wasn't just cheating. He was learning how to cheat, how to delete messages fast, how to wear cologne lightly, how to smile normally while lying. He became an expert at acting like the man Rita married, while slowly turning into someone else. Rita, meanwhile, noticed the shift like a woman noticing rain clouds from inside a locked room. She couldn't name it yet, but she felt it in the way Marcus's hugs became brief, in the way his patience disappeared, in the way silence filled the spaces where affection used to sit. Still, she kept hope the way some people keep old clothes, because throwing them away feels like admitting you'll never fit into them again. The first time Rita heard it, she thought she was imagining things, soft giggles floating down the hallway, the faint sound of a door closing gently like someone was trying not to announce themselves. The mansion was large, yes, but it had a particular kind of quiet that Rita had come to know. This sound was different, playful, youthful, careless. She walked slowly, barefoot, moving as though the tiles might tell on her. At the corridor that led to the second wing, the part of the house Marcus once called private rooms for guests, she paused. The laughter stopped. A moment later, Marcus appeared, shirt collar slightly unsettled, eyes too bright. He smiled too quickly. Why are you awake? He asked, as if her sleeplessness was the problem and not the laughter living in her house. Rita didn't accuse him. Not yet. She just stared at him the way you stare at a cup that looks full but feels too light. Days later, it happened again, and this time the insult was louder. Marcus started bringing women in with the confidence of a man who believes his money can buy silence from walls. He didn't parade them through the main entrance like a movie villain. No, he did something worse. He moved them quietly, like smuggling shame into his own home, as though Rita was too small to deserve honesty. When Rita confronted him gently, Marcus didn't panic. He shrugged. He acted like she was asking for a luxury he didn't owe her, respect. You're imagining things, he said once. Another time he said, it's business guests. Rita almost laughed at that, because even the ceiling fan knew it wasn't business. The staff avoided her eyes. The mansion, once warm, became awkward, like a party where everyone knows the secret except the hostess. Rita began living with humiliation, as if it was furniture nobody wanted to move. She would sit in the sitting room and hear the faint sound of a door closing in the second wing, and her heart would tighten, not because she wanted to fight, but because she hated what she was becoming. A woman listening for proof. She tried to speak to Marcus at dinner, but he ate like a man doing charity, quick, distracted, ready to escape. He started sleeping later and waking earlier, so even the bed felt like a shared space only in name. And yet Rita still tried to be kind, still cooked his favorite meals, still asked about his health, because some women love with stubborn dignity. Meanwhile, Marcus grew bolder, because nothing strengthens disrespect like unanswered cruelty. To him, Rita's patience looked like permission. Rita chose a morning when the sunlight was gentle and the house was quiet, hoping peace would make Marcus more human. She didn't scream or throw things. She didn't gather relatives or threaten him with public disgrace. She approached him like a wife who still believed her husband could return to himself. Marcus, she began, voice steady, this house is changing. You are changing. Marcus glanced up from his phone with that expression rich men wear when they are being interrupted by reality. Rita sat opposite him, hands folded, and spoke carefully. She reminded him of their vows, of the way he used to defend her, of the respect that once lived between them like a protective fence. "If you're unhappy, tell me," she pleaded. "If there's something you need, let us fix it. But don't destroy us with strangers." She didn't accuse him of every detail. She simply asked him to stop. Marcus listened the way people listen to radio announcements they don't care about. When she finished, he exhaled like she had exhausted him. Then he did what cruel people do best. He reduced her pain into something small enough for him to step on. "You're being dramatic," he said. "You have too much time." Rita blinked, surprised, like someone who just realized the person they married speaks a different language. She tried again, softer. "I'm your wife," she said. "I'm not your enemy. I'm begging you because I love you." Marcus laughed, short and sharp, not the laughter of joy, but the laughter of a man who feels powerful. "Love," he scoffed. "Rita, you married wealth. Enjoy it and rest." It hurt, not because the words were clever, but because they were careless. Rita left the room with her dignity barely intact, then returned later with a different approach, practical, calm, solution-minded. She suggested counseling. She suggested time away from those friends. She suggested boundaries in the home. Marcus rejected everything like a child pushing away food just to prove he can. "I'm not a small boy you can direct," he snapped. "Stop monitoring me." The irony was painful. He wanted freedom to misbehave, but still demanded the title of husband. Rita realized then that Marcus wasn't just cheating. He was rewriting the rules of their marriage without asking her to sign. That evening, Rita tried to pray, but her mind kept drifting to the second wing of the house. She wondered how Marcus could kiss her forehead in public, and then entertain disgrace in private. She wondered when his conscience became something he could switch off like a light. She even wondered, briefly, dangerously, if she was a problem. That thought made her laugh bitterly, because it sounded like Marcus's voice inside her head. Rita wasn't weak, she was exhausted. And exhaustion can look like surrender when it is really the early stage of awakening. Rita's pleading did not stop Marcus. If anything, it fed his arrogance. He began to treat her concern like background noise, annoying but harmless. He came home later, talked less, and when he did speak, his words carried a new sharpness, as though kindness had become an unnecessary expense. Rita noticed the way he would step past her greetings like she was part of the furniture, the way his eyes were always elsewhere, the way his hands that once held hers now held his phone with more tenderness. She tried to hold on to memories, but memories began to feel like old photographs, proof of something that used to be alive. Still, she made one more attempt, not for his ego, but for her heart. She cooked his favorite meal and waited until after dinner, when the house was calm and he couldn't hide behind busy noise. This time, Rita cried. Not the dramatic, crying Marcus accused her of, real crying, the kind that comes from a place too deep to perform. She told him she was embarrassed in her own home. She told him she felt lonely with a husband present. She told him the women he brought into the house were not just insults to her love, but insults to her dignity. She asked him why he changed, and if those acquaintances meant more to him than the woman who built peace around his life. Marcus's face hardened, as though empathy offended him. "So what do you want?" he barked. "Should I kneel? Should I beg?" Rita shook her head. "I want my husband back," she whispered. Marcus stood up and paced. Then he delivered the line that bruises more than a slap because it makes the victim feel foolish for caring. "Rita, you're too emotional. Stop acting like the world is ending because a man is enjoying himself." Enjoying himself. As if her pain was just a small inconvenience in the entertainment of his ego. He told her she should be grateful he still paid bills, as though marriage was a subscription service. He even accused her of trying to control him, which was rich coming from a man who controlled everything else, money, movement, image. Rita realized then that Marcus was no longer arguing with her. He was arguing with accountability. After that night, Rita's tears began to change texture. They became quieter, more private, less hopeful. She stopped begging daily because she could feel herself thinning out emotionally, like a cloth washed too many times. She started observing Marcus with a new kind of attention, not the attention of love, but the attention of a woman learning what her life really is. She noticed patterns. She noticed calls. She noticed how his stories never matched time. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was clarity. And clarity is the one thing a cheating man fears, because once a woman sees clearly, she becomes difficult to deceive, and even harder to keep. Marcus reached a point where hiding felt like unnecessary effort. He had done wrong for so long that he began to resent the idea of being judged for it. That resentment made him bold. He started bringing mistresses into his life as though they were accessories, like watches and shoes, things to show off when he wanted to feel powerful. Rita noticed the shift not just in the house, but outside. The careless way Marcus smiled at certain women in public, the way he stopped being cautious with his words, the way he carried himself like a man who believed he could not be punished. In his mind, wealth was a shield, and Rita's patience was proof that she would never leave. He wasn't just cheating now. He was daring consequences to touch him. One afternoon, Rita returned from a short outing and found a woman in the sitting area near the second wing, young, confident, sitting like she owned air. The woman's lipstick was bright, her laugh light, and her eyes carried that reckless boldness some mistresses wear when they think they've replaced the wife emotionally. Rita's throat tightened. Marcus appeared moments later, completely unbothered, and introduced the woman with the casualness of a man introducing a colleague. Rita waited for shame, for apology, for even a small sign that he understood how disrespectful it was. Instead, Marcus's expression said, "What will you do?" The mistress smiled at Rita with a sweetness that felt like an insult wrapped in sugar. Rita did not scream. She did something more terrifying. She stayed calm. She greeted the woman politely and walked away, not because she approved, but because she felt something in her chest shift from heartbreak to resolve. Marcus misread her calmness as defeat. He followed her later, annoyed. "Why are you acting like a saint?" he snapped. "If you have something to say, say it." Rita looked at him for a long moment and asked quietly, "Do you even respect me?" Marcus scoffed, the way people scoff when they don't want to answer honestly. "You're still here, aren't you?" he replied. And that was the moment Rita understood. Marcus's cruelty wasn't just a character flaw. It was a strategy. He believed her staying meant he could do anything. That night, Rita stared at the ceiling and realized the mansion was no longer a home. It was a stage where Marcus performed power and she played suffering. She thought about all her pleading, all her advice, all her tears, and how Marcus treated them like entertainment. She didn't decide on divorce yet, but she began to imagine what freedom would feel like. And in that imagination, something inside her stood up. Marcus, unaware, slept like a man whose house is burning slowly, but who still thinks the smoke is just weather. Rita did not announce the divorce the way movies teach women to. No dramatic suitcase, no midnight shouting match, no audience. She chose a quiet evening, the kind Marcus usually ignored because silence bored him. He was scrolling through his phone when she spoke, her voice steady in a way that almost sounded unfamiliar to her own ears. "Marcus," she said, "I want a divorce." The words landed between them without decoration. For a second, Marcus didn't react. He laughed lightly, the laugh of a man who assumes he misheard something absurd. "You want what?" he asked, still smiling, still powerful in his mind. Rita repeated it calmly, without adding emotion to soften it. That was when the smile faded, not into sadness, but into alarm. Marcus stood up too quickly, as if the chair had betrayed him. Divorce was not a word he had prepared for. Affairs, yes. Arguments, yes. Tears, even. But divorce? That word threatened structures he cared about far more than feelings. He began talking at once, words tumbling over each other like coins spilling from a broken pocket. He reminded Rita of how long they had been married, of the good years, of everything he had provided. He framed the conversation like a business negotiation, not a marriage ending. "You're angry," he said. "This is not the time to make decisions." Rita listened without interrupting. She noticed how he never once said, "I'm sorry." He spoke instead about reputation, timing, patience. He asked for space to think, as though she hadn't been thinking quietly for months. Marcus believed control could be regained by delaying action. Rita, for the first time, did not agree. When Marcus realized she wasn't backing down, his tone changed. He accused her of being influenced by outsiders. He asked if someone had filled her head. He even joked weakly, saying she couldn't survive without him. Rita smiled sadly at that, not because it was funny, but because it revealed how little he understood her. "I'm not leaving because I hate you," she said. "I'm leaving because I no longer recognize myself in this house." That sentence frightened Marcus more than anger ever could. A woman who has lost herself is dangerous, not because she is loud, but because she is done trying to be understood. The days that followed were the most chaotic Marcus had experienced in years. Panic settled into him like a fever, and no amount of wealth could cool it. He began sweating at the smallest inconveniences, pacing through rooms he once ruled with ease. Calls were made in hushed tones. Meetings were postponed. For the first time, Marcus felt chased by time instead of commanding it. He watched Rita closely, confused by her calm. She was not packing, not crying openly, not begging anymore. That silence unsettled him. Silence meant planning. Panic in men like Marcus does not express itself as remorse. It expresses itself as urgency. He suddenly wanted meetings, conversations, reassurances. He followed Rita around the house like a man afraid his shadow might leave him. Marcus tried a different approach, guilt. He reminded Rita of sacrifices he claimed to have made, of how his name protected her, of how divorce would destroy everything. He spoke of shame, of how people would talk. "Do you want to be that woman?" he asked. Rita listened politely, almost gently, and replied, "I already am that woman in this house." That answer landed heavily. Marcus had built his confidence on the idea that Rita would endure anything as long as the mansion stood. Now that belief was cracking. He began losing sleep. His appetite thinned. Even his mistresses noticed his distraction. For the first time, pleasure stopped comforting him. Fear had entered the room, and fear is a jealous guest. In desperation, Marcus reached for allies. He contacted Rita's sister-in-law, painting himself as a man on the verge of losing his family. He spoke carefully, skillfully, turning himself into a victim of misunderstanding and temporary mistakes. He cried just enough to sound sincere. The sister-in-law, moved by old memories and the sacred weight of marriage, agreed to speak to Rita. When she did, Rita wavered. Not because Marcus deserved forgiveness, but because Rita's heart was still human. She remembered the man Marcus once was. She wondered if this was the last test of patience. For one fragile moment, forgiveness stood at the door again, quiet, hopeful, dangerous. Rita did not know yet that Marcus, even now, was betraying her again in secret. And this time, the discovery would end everything. Marcus's fear began to rot into desperation. He no longer slept deeply. His nights were restless, broken by thoughts he could not silence. The image of Rita walking away from him, calm, composed, unmoved, haunted him more than any courtroom ever could. He started watching her the way people watch a door they're afraid will close forever. Every time she left the room, he felt compelled to follow, pretending concern while masking panic. He talked too much now, filling silences with unnecessary explanations, repeating stories that required no defense. Even his voice had changed. The confidence that once sat comfortably in his chest now trembled at the edges. Marcus realized something terrifying. Rita was no longer afraid of him, and fear had always been his unspoken leverage. He shifted tactics again, this time leaning fully into emotional warfare. Marcus reminded Rita of her kindness, weaponizing it. He accused her of cruelty for wanting to leave him when he was struggling. He painted himself as a broken man who needed patience, not consequences. "You're the strong one," he said, voice cracking carefully. "If you leave now, it will destroy me." He spoke of memories of laughter, of promises that conveniently ignored betrayal. He framed divorce as abandonment, as if his affairs were minor scratches compared to the wound of her departure. Rita listened, heart heavy, because guilt spoken with desperation can sound like sincerity. She felt the old ache rise, the urge to fix, to endure, to save. For days, Rita lived in emotional conflict. Marcus hovered around her like a man afraid of silence, offering help he had never offered before. He suddenly wanted to eat together, talk together, plan together. The irony stung. He had become attentive only when consequences appeared. Rita noticed the performance, but still, her heart resisted finality. Marriage teaches women endurance before it teaches them exit. She almost convinced herself that this fear meant change. What she didn't know was that while Marcus begged during the day, he was still lying at night, still sneaking calls, still arranging meetings, still feeding the very fire that was burning his marriage to ash. The intervention came gently, wrapped in familiarity. Rita's sister-in-law visited one afternoon with concern etched on her face. She spoke softly, carefully, as someone who believed she was saving a marriage, not prolonging its death. She told Rita that Marcus was not himself, that men sometimes fall, but can rise again if given patience. She reminded Rita of cultural expectations, of endurance being mistaken for strength, of forgiveness being praised as virtue. Marriage is bigger than feelings, she said. Don't let anger ruin what you built. Rita listened quietly, her heart twisting in two directions. Hearing Marcus described as a wounded man made her doubt her resolve. She wondered if leaving now would mean she failed the woman she once believed herself to be. That evening, Rita sat alone in the bedroom, surrounded by memories that refused to fade politely. She remembered Marcus's early gentleness, his laughter, the way he used to defend her presence in his life. She wondered if people ever truly change, or if they simply get lost. Her resolve softened. Not fully, but enough to hesitate. When Marcus sensed the shift, he leaned in carefully, like a gambler who knows the table is still open. He apologized, not fully, not clearly, but enough to sound remorseful. He promised distance from those women, promised counseling, promised effort. Rita did not agree to stay, but she did not push him away either. And that small pause felt like hope to Marcus. What Rita didn't know was that Marcus mistook hesitation for victory. That very night, emboldened by what he believed was forgiveness in progress, he reached out to a mistress he had never truly let go of. Old habits don't die when consequences are delayed. They grow bolder. Marcus told himself it was the last time, that stress had pushed him, that he deserved comfort. He convinced himself that Rita would never know. Fate, however, was no longer patient with Marcus. And for the first time, the truth would not hide behind walls or excuses. Rita did not plan to catch Marcus again. Truth has a way of revealing itself without invitation. She returned home earlier than expected that evening, her mind still heavy from the conversation with her sister-in-law. As she entered the mansion, something felt wrong, not dramatic, just off. The house was too quiet in the wrong places and too alive in others. She followed the sound instinctively, heart steady but alert, until she reached the second wing. This time, there was no doubt. The door was half open. Voices were clear. Laughter, familiar, careless, intimate. Rita stood still, not trembling, not rushing, just absorbing the reality she had tried so hard to deny. When Marcus saw her, his face collapsed. There was no clever explanation this time, no performance ready. The mistress froze, caught between embarrassment and defiance. Rita looked at them both calmly, her eyes dry, her expression almost peaceful. In that moment, something final settled inside her. She realized that Marcus had not changed, he had simply paused. His begging had been fear, not repentance. His tears had been strategy, not remorse. And her hesitation had nearly cost her clarity. Rita did not scream. She did not insult. She turned and walked away, carrying something far heavier than anger, certainty. Marcus chased after her, shouting apologies that sounded hollow even to himself. He blamed stress, confusion, fear, everything except himself. Rita stopped once, just once, and looked at him with a sadness so deep it frightened him more than rage. "You didn't just betray me," she said quietly. You betrayed the mercy I almost gave you." Then she walked away completely. In that moment, Marcus understood that something irreparable had happened. The door to forgiveness had not slammed. It had closed gently, permanently. From that night onward, Rita said nothing more about reconciliation. Her silence returned, but it was no longer confused. It was resolved. Marcus, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done, began to unravel. He did not know yet how loudly he would beg in court, how publicly he would break, or how far Rita would go to protect herself. But one thing was certain. The marriage had ended long before the divorce papers were ever signed. After the second betrayal, Marcus entered a strange phase that confused even himself. Outwardly, he became cooperative, quiet, polite, almost obedient. He stopped bringing mistresses into the mansion. He lowered his voice. He spoke softly around Rita, as though fear had taught him manners. He asked if she had eaten, asked if she needed anything, even offered to drive her places she could easily drive herself. To an outsider, it might have looked like remorse finally settling in. To Rita, it felt like a man rehearsing a role too late. She had already seen behind the curtain. Still, she said nothing. Silence had become her strongest language, and Marcus, mistaking it for weakness, assumed he still had time to correct the narrative. Behind that calm exterior, Marcus was panicking strategically. He began consulting people who spoke in hushed tones and promised clever solutions. He stopped asking, "How do I save my marriage?" and started asking, "How do I protect my wealth?" That shift mattered. It revealed where his real fear lived. Divorce no longer scared him because of loneliness or loss of Rita. It scared him because of consequences. He started delaying meetings, requesting extensions, suggesting cooling-off periods. He pretended to want reconciliation while calculating exit routes. The man who once controlled empires now feared documents. Rita noticed subtle changes, files moved, calls taken outside, sudden interest in financial details he had long ignored. She didn't confront him. She observed. Every lie Marcus told now added to a pattern too clear to ignore. What Marcus didn't know was that Rita had already begun protecting herself quietly. Not with rage, not with drama, with preparation. She consulted professionals discreetly, learned her rights, documented everything that mattered. She did not rush. Marcus believed delay worked in his favor. Rita knew delay often exposes truth. And while Marcus was busy rearranging numbers on paper, Rita was rearranging her life internally, detaching piece by piece, memory by memory, preparing to leave without begging, without confusion, without regret. As the divorce proceedings approached, tension filled the mansion like thick air before a storm. Marcus's confidence eroded visibly. He became irritable when plans didn't go his way, snapping at staff, pacing during phone calls, sweating through shirts that once fit his authority comfortably. He tried to appear composed in front of Rita, but his body betrayed him. Fear has a way of leaking. Rita, meanwhile, moved with a calmness that unsettled him deeply. She no longer asked questions. She no longer reacted to his moods. She behaved like someone who had already left mentally, and that frightened Marcus more than confrontation ever could. Marcus escalated his efforts. He attempted last-minute persuasion, sudden apologies, exaggerated regret, emotional displays that felt rehearsed. He even cried one evening, sitting across from Rita with his head in his hands, speaking about pressure, temptation, weakness. For a brief moment, Rita felt a familiar ache. Not love, history. She remembered the man he once was and mourned him quietly. But mourning is not the same as staying. She listened respectfully and responded simply, "You didn't just hurt me. You planned to survive hurting me." Marcus had no answer to that, because it was true. Unbeknownst to him, Rita had gathered evidence patiently, financial movements, inconsistencies, witnesses, timelines. She did not need revenge. She needed protection. Each document strengthened her resolve. Marcus, still believing he was smarter, continued moving assets clumsily, unaware that desperation makes mistakes louder. The closer court came, the more reckless he became. He underestimated Rita, because he had always mistaken her gentleness for ignorance. That miscalculation would cost him dearly. On the eve of court, Marcus barely slept. Rita slept peacefully for the first time in months. That difference alone told the entire story. The courtroom was colder than Marcus expected. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. As proceedings began, Marcus sat stiffly, trying to project calm, but his legs shook uncontrollably beneath the table. Rita sat upright, composed, her expression unreadable. When evidence was presented, Marcus's confidence unraveled in stages. At first, he smirked, certain his maneuvers had worked. Then came the documents, the timelines, the explanations that contradicted his own statements. With each revelation, the room grew quieter. Marcus's breathing became audible. Sweat formed at his temples. The man who once commanded rooms now struggled to command himself. When the judge announced Rita's entitlement, alimony, compensation, consequences, something inside Marcus snapped. He stood abruptly, shouting, voice cracking, desperation spilling out unfiltered. He screamed about unfairness, about how Rita was taking everything, about how he was being destroyed. His cries echoed through the courtroom, raw and undignified. He begged. He sobbed. He pleaded loudly, demanding sympathy he had denied his wife for years. The scene was chaotic, uncomfortable, unforgettable. Security approached. Marcus resisted, still shouting Rita's name, still crying, still unraveling. He was physically escorted out, his protests echoing behind him like a cautionary tale. Rita watched, tears filling her eyes, not from regret, but from pity. She did not celebrate his fall. She mourned the man he could have remained. When the ruling was finalized, Rita won. Completely. And with that victory came clarity. She did not linger. She did not gloat. She left the courtroom quietly, already planning her relocation to a far city, a place where her name would not be attached to humiliation. Behind her, unseen by Rita, one of Marcus's mistresses watched with hatred burning silently in her eyes, whispering a vow she believed fate would honor. Marcus's removal from the courtroom marked the moment he truly lost everything, not just wealth, but authority, dignity, and the illusion of control. Outside the courthouse, he collapsed onto a bench like a man whose body had finally accepted what his mind resisted. His cries had emptied him. People passed, some recognizing him, others sensing his disgrace without knowing his name. The phones that once rang endlessly were quiet now. Messages went unanswered. The same acquaintances who once encouraged indulgence suddenly had busy schedules and weak signals. Marcus sat there replaying the moment Rita didn't rush after him, didn't defend him, didn't even look back. That hurt more than the ruling. He realized, too late, that love leaves before the law arrives. Inside the courthouse, Rita completed the final formalities with composure. Her signature was steady, her voice calm. Yet when it was done, when the last paper was stamped, emotion finally reached her. She stepped into a quiet corridor and allowed herself a few tears, not of regret, not of doubt, but of release. Years of patience, humiliation, and restraint flowed out silently. She thought of the girl who had married Marcus, believing loyalty would always be enough. She forgave herself for staying too long. That forgiveness mattered more than any alimony. When she left the building, her posture was lighter, as though something heavy had finally been set down. Across town, one of Marcus's mistresses watched the news unfold with clenched fists. To her, Rita was not a survivor. She was an obstacle. In her mind, Rita had stolen a future that was supposed to belong to her. She replayed every promise Marcus had whispered, every lie she had believed. Rage settled in her chest, slow and deliberate. She did not cry. She did not scream. She smiled thinly and made a quiet decision. This is not over, she told herself. And while Marcus mourned his losses, another danger was quietly choosing a direction toward Rita. Rita did not linger in the city that held too many memories. Within weeks, she relocated to a faraway place where streets did not know her history and faces carried no expectations. The new city was unfamiliar, but it felt honest. She rented a modest home, embraced solitude, and began rebuilding herself slowly, intentionally. For the first time in years, her thoughts were her own. No listening for doors closing. No calculating moods. No begging for decency. Freedom did not arrive loudly. It arrived like peace settling into bones. Rita found herself smiling at ordinary things again. She slept deeply. She breathed fully. She was not running, she was choosing. Marcus, meanwhile, drifted through the aftermath like a ghost haunting his own ruins. The mansion felt too large and too quiet. The women who once crowded his time disappeared as quickly as they arrived. Without money to impress or power to protect him, Marcus became ordinary in the harshest way. Regret finally arrived, not dramatic, not loud, but constant. He thought of Rita in fragments. Her patience, her warnings, the mercy he wasted. But regret is a poor negotiator. It only visits when it can no longer change outcomes. In another corner of the city, Rita, left behind, the mistress who had vowed revenge, gathered information quietly. She asked questions. She followed digital traces. She convinced herself that destiny owed her something. Rita, unaware, continued healing, believing distance meant safety. The story closed not with fear, but with contrast, a woman finally free, and a shadow still choosing pursuit. Because some people do not seek justice or love, they seek replacement. And while Rita had won her freedom, the echoes of Marcus's past had not yet decided to let her go. Please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.